Our series on the mythical history of the classical world must naturally first answer one question. How did the Greeks and their Roman successors believe it all began? The truth is that there is never one definitive Greek creation story. While the account of the archaic poet Hesiod was the most widely accepted, Greek explanations for the origins of the cosmos included many regional, chronological, cultic, and philosophical variants. In this video, we shall explore theogonies, or divine genealogies, along with Orphic doctrine, the theories of philosophers, and later, Roman and medieval interpretations of Greek notions of creation. To begin with, was there the consensus that the universe was created at all? In the 4th century BC, Plato held that the cosmos was a living organism, and believed that the basic elements of earth, water, air, and fire existed inherently. By the 1st century BC, the Latin poet Lucretius asserted that any beginning to the universe was impossible because everything had to originate from something. However, as we shall see, creation stories were still common, and even the rational Aristotle acknowledged that there was a general consensus among the Greeks that the cosmos had come into being long ago. Many people might be surprised to learn that there is a brief reference to creation in the Iliad, where it is stated that the river Ocean is the father of all gods. Such a sentiment is upheld by the first Vatican mythographer, who wrote on Greco-Roman myths in the early Middle Ages, likely from Latin sources only. According to the first Vatican mythographer, it was the river Ocean who conceived Uranus, often said to be the original king of the gods, with the goddess Thetis. More importantly, one of the Orphic hymns asserts that the origins of the gods and humanity alike are with the river Ocean. However, caution is needed, as others of the Orphic hymns claim the same about both Night and Uranus. According to a fragment of a lost epic titled Titanomachy, believed to be most likely by the archaic poet Eumelus, Ether was the god who was the originator of the entire cosmos. Eumelus also called Uranus a son of Ether. Meanwhile, a fragment attributed to the legendary sage Musaeus, a pre-Homeric contemporary of Orpheus in the Greek tradition, states that the earliest gods were Tartarus and Night, Tartarus being the Greco-Roman equivalent of Hell. As a final contender, the third Vatican mythographer regards Kronos to have been the earliest god from the perspective of the pagans. As previously stated, the Hesiodic account of creation was the Greek creation myth that came closest to being genuinely canonical, so let us proceed to relate it. Hesiod writes that, in the beginning there was chaos, followed by the appearance of Gaia, the earth goddess. Deep underneath Gaia, Tartarus was subsequently born. Also spawned in the New World was Eros, the god of love, who is better known today by his Roman name, Cupid. Chaos bore the god Darkness and the goddess Night, who then married and went on to have the son Ether and the goddess Day. Gaia was next to become a mother, asexually bearing first Uranus, the original god of the sky. She later bore Pontus, the original god of the sea, as well as the nymphs. The list of primordial deities recounted by Hesiod is much longer, with Night becoming a prolific mother, but we shall choose to stop there for the sake of conciseness. The Hesiodic account of creation essentially relies on a theogony, hence the title of the poem that these details are derived from. However, Hesiod was not the sole classical author to write a theogony. Acusilaus, a mythographer, historian, and pre-Socratic philosopher, active in the late 6th and early 5th century BC, also writes about the origins of the gods. Like Hesiod, Acusilaus was of the opinion that everything began with chaos. Next, Acusilaus held that, in addition to Gaia, the god Darkness and the goddess Night appeared. Darkness and Night, Acusilaus writes, became the parents of the god Eros and the goddess Metis, who he says were the ancestors of the other gods. From the origins of Eros we must turn to the lyric poetess Sappho, an expert on love. It was noted in antiquity that her accounts of Eros varied, although ancient citations of Sappho seem to agree that she maintained that the father of Eros was Uranus. Depending on the fragment, she gives the mother of Eros as either Gaia or Aphrodite. It is also worth considering Roman theogonies. The most elaborate of these is ascribed to Hyginus. While Hyginus covers the entire range of gods, we shall focus solely on the primordial deities given that they are the only ones pertinent to the current subject. Hyginus is unique in that he mentions a predecessor to Chaos, which he calls Mist. Chaos, he says, was a child of Mist, and the two later conceived night, day, darkness, and ether. Darkness and night, in turn, would become parents of fate, aging, death, destruction, continence, sleep, dreaming, and eros. Finally, the union of ether and day would produce Gaia, Uranus, and Pontus. In addition to theogonies, there were more philosophically grounded stories of creation in the classical world. A wide range of pre-Socratics offered ideas about the subject, but we will focus on the more detailed surviving accounts. Generally, such accounts did not preclude the divine. The most influential creation myth associated with a specific philosophical school was that of Orphism, a mystery religion centered around the legendary sage Orpheus. Sadly, the actual scriptures of the Orphics are lost, although the theological writings of the Church Fathers and other late antique literature has preserved a great deal of Orphic doctrine. These accounts come mainly from Christians and Neoplatonists rather than the Orphics themselves, but they are the best record that we possess. More importantly, surviving Orphic doctrine is not always consistent, either due to the biases of the literary witness or because of possible disagreements between the Orphics. However, we shall, nonetheless, attempt to tell the Orphic creation myth from the available evidence. One key element to mention is that the Orphics did apparently accept the idea of a created deity who designed the land, seas, and heavens. The Orphic tradition believed that, initially, there was no ether, Gaia, or Uranus. Instead, the cosmos began with only chaos, night, darkness, and Tartarus until a mysterious occurrence. Night laid an egg, and from this egg was born Eros. After Eros and Chaos slept together somewhere in Tartarus, the human race was born. Perhaps most significantly, the Orphics appeared to maintain that this was, in fact, earlier than the appearance of the gods, whom they said Eros had also brought forth. They held that Night was the original cosmic queen, later to be replaced by the kingship of Uranus. Plenty of other remnants of Orphic mythology remain, although they are set later in mythical history. A few other lesser creation myths resembled the one found in Orphism. One of these was attributed to Epimenides, a pre-Socratic philosopher. His account was that ether and night were the earliest gods and that Tartarus was their son. Two titans spawned in Tartarus, an egg was formed from their union, and the gods hatched from this egg. Another one of the pre-Socratics to speculate on cosmic origins was Pherecydes of Syros. He held that water was the first element to appear, a belief shared by a number of other philosophers, most notably Thales of Miletus. Pherecydes of Syros was unique in that he actually regarded Zeus to be a created deity, believing that Zeus took the form of Eros during his creation of the cosmos. The most elaborate such variant from classical antiquity to feature a created deity is given by the Augustan poet Ovid. Like older writers, Ovid mentions chaos, but he paints a more explicit portrait of what this actually means. According to Ovid, chaos was what existed before the existence of anything tangible. Chaos was each of the elements that would later comprise the universe in one disorderly heap of incomprehensible size. It was, therefore, the task of the creator deity, whose identity Ovid claims is unknown, to separate the elements into something logical. Thus, earth was turned into the land, water into the seas, air into the winds, and fire into the sun. Along with these features came a world divided into different biomes based on the respective details of their arrangement. Similar to the Ovidian account of creation, albeit more secular, is the one offered by Diodorus of Sicily. Diodorus also writes that the world, the heavens, and all that they contained were messily combined in an utterly unrecognizable form. At some point, the elements separated in a manner similar to what Ovid describes, except for Diodorus mentions no divine force involved. However, like Ovid, Diodorus discusses how this process led to the formation of land and sea. Upon initial examination, this may appear as if Diodorus was endorsing a godless account of the universe. In fact, the early books of his historical library are packed with references to the gods once the reader passes the creation story. As a historian, the stance of Diodorus is that the gods were human figures from a distant past whose deeds were so grand compared to those of his contemporaries that they could seem like nothing other than gods. For our final Greek creation myth, we must look forward all the way to the 14th century AD. It was in this century that Giovanni Boccaccio, the eclectic Italian author best known for the Decameron, also put together a massive divine genealogy using mainly Latin sources. While authors such as Boccaccio, who wrote beyond antiquity, must be used with caution, their utility is often undervalued. Medieval libraries simply had more original manuscripts on their shelves than we do today. Boccaccio is one writer from the late Middle Ages to make especially wide use of texts now lost. In particular, he often cites an otherwise unknown Theogonius, who was, presumably, a Latin mythographer. As we shall see, this Theogonius provided Boccaccio with one of the most influential ideas of his genealogy of the pagan gods. When recording the ancestry of the Greco-Roman gods, Boccaccio traces them all back to a mysterious figure called Demogorgon. Modern scholars are quick to dismiss any tradition of Demogorgon, arguing that the word comes from a misreading of a commentary by Lactantius Placidus on the Theogony, a Latin epic by the poet Statius. However, it should not be discounted that the citation given by Boccaccio for Demogorgon is not of Lactantius Placidus, whose work is extant, but Theodontius, whose status as a lost author means his Demogorgon testimony is impossible to disprove. According to Boccaccio, Demogorgon was the husband of the goddess Eternity, whom he cites the Latin poet Claudian as living in an ancient cave surrounded by a green snake of monstrous proportions eating its tail. Boccaccio maintains that Demogorgon lived in the time of Chaos, whom he makes a goddess, while stating that Chaos was another wife of his. One day, while Demogorgon and Chaos were taking a nap in the Cave of Eternity, he noticed something unusual about her womb. With no goddess of birth yet, Demogorgon had to manually pry out his new children, who were Strife, the Three Fates, and Pan, while her mouth and nose were spewing horrendous clouds of fire. As we have now seen, some Greek creation myths were especially influential, but there was never a single definitive version. The Hesiodic account of creation was the most widely accepted, yet the Orphic school was also influential. Greek philosophers speculated about the origins of the universe and ended up spawning new versions, as did historians. We even have echoes of further variants in later medieval writers. Some stories focus on a theogony, others a creator deity, and still more attempted a degree of secularism. If nothing else, the Greeks, like all ancient peoples, gave a lot of thought to where it all came from. In the next episode, we will continue with the Hesiodic theogony and introduce a new generation of gods, the Titans.